Hi, I'm James and welcome to my review of Zvezda's ZSU23-4. Now this was a Soviet anti-aircraft weapon system named after the river in Siberia. Quite a couple of nicknames. The Russian soldiers nicknamed it the sewing machine because of the rapid rate of fire, reminded them of that, and the Americans in particular tended to call it the Zoo based on the initials. So let's open the box and have a look at what we've got in it. First thing we've got are the instructions. This is quite complex for a Zvezda kit. There are 29 parts in it altogether, and some of them are quite fiddly. It's snapped together like all the rest of the kits, although there is one part that does require gluing, which we'll come to in a minute. Next we've got a little orange card. That's just advising the Art of Tactic website has changed from the printed instructions. Next we have the transfers for the numbers. Nice and simple. You've got 6 sets of 1 to 9 and 0. Great, because then with the Soviet using a 3-number system, you can actually put 3 numbers on each of the vehicles without having a problem if you wanted to have 111 or 222, or usually like me you have a couple of spares, because I can guarantee 1 or 2 of them will go wrong. So then we come to the actual sprues themselves, very cleanly cast, like I said, snapped together, nice and simple. Now I look at this very much from the perspective of a wargamer rather than a modeler. I'd rather have a simple model kit that goes together easily rather than a complex one that looks perhaps that tiny little bit better. If you're gaming, I would suggest that you glue the parts together. It's going to be a bit more robust on the table. Now there are various versions of the ZSU23-4, and when you look at this there are 3 significant differences from the Battlefront model. The Battlefront model is a very early version, ideal for 1973 Yom Kippur War, but there were some problems. The first problem was the fact that the guns could overheat because they were air-cooled rather than the later water-cooled version. You can't really tell that in scale, but that's not an issue. The problem with the air-cooled was that the weapon would overheat. The round would go into the chamber. It was that hot the round would fire, and of course that would cycle the action, bringing in the next round, and it would keep going until the magazine remained empty. So there was an improved version of the ZSU23-4, which is the ZSU23-4M. Now, looking at the significant differences, there's 3 things that stand out this model as different from the Battlefront one. The first is the cover above the top of the guns. Now this is an awkward part to fit. It doesn't have any way to hold it in place, so I've glued it in place. It means the guns can't move much, but like I say, as a wargamer I'm not too worried about that. The second significant change on the 23-4M was the addition of an air vent to try and clear some of the fumes from the turret. This can easily be left off the kit. There are 2 small little holes, so you could just cover those over if you did want the earlier version. Now the third difference is actually quite interesting. If you look at the front of the radar dish, what you'll actually see are 2 ribs running down it. Now when you actually look at pictures on the internet, you very rarely see that. And that actually tells me that this version is actually the ZSU23-4MZ, which has got IFF to help identify if aircraft are hostile or friendly. Now, if you wanted to go for the earlier version, all you'd need to do is just to cut those 2 ribs off. It is worth noting there was almost a sub-variant of the MZ, which actually had a flat face on the dish, but a slightly thicker dish. At this scale, I don't think you could tell the difference anyway. So how does it compare scale-wise? Well, I've put it up with a couple of figures here that come from the Plastic Soldier Company, and there'll be a link at the top of the screen if you want to see my review of those, and a Zvezda BTR-80 in the background. As you can see, they fit together quite nicely scale-wise and look about right. So, while we're having a quick look at some of the pictures of the vehicle I've built, let's actually just quickly talk about the history. It was introduced in 1965 to replace the ZSU23-4, although that did soldier on until the late 70s, usually in one battery with ZSU23-4s and one battery with ZSU53-2s. Manufactured until 1984, it was replaced by the ZSU-32, although it is worth noting that the vehicle is still in service with the Russian Army, particularly with the naval infantry. I find it a very useful vehicle. Around 6,500 were made, of which 2,500 were exported. Most of these seem to have been the early versions, judging by what we tend to see in the captured examples. It has a crew of 4, commander, gunner, driver and a radar op. The driver had his own compartment in the hull with no connection with the rest of the vehicle. The radar operator was in the turret. He had a separate curtained off section, but could actually just draw that back and get into the main compartment. In use, as we said, there were 2 batteries. When the ZSU-57-2 went out of service, it was replaced with a battery of SA-9s or 13s, and in the 80s a 3rd battery was added to the anti-aircraft units, and BTRs or BMPs carrying SA-7 infantry made up a 3rd battery. Now, the gun is still very effective against helicopters, less effective as jets have got more effective, but they have then moved very much into a fire support role. And it's worth noting that in 1991 they were regarded as such a threat to soft armoured vehicles that some US commanders actually ordered them engaged as a priority target above tanks. The Russians found this particularly useful for ground support as well. They used it initially in Afghanistan but also in Chechnya because the gun elevation is so high as it needs to be, whereas the tanks and IFVs, because of their low silhouette, couldn't elevate the gun very high. So when they were being shot at from on high, with mountains in Afghanistan or buildings in Chechnya, what they often would do is attach a ZSU to that unit for firing at elevations. And this actually led to a variant of the ZSU in Afghanistan, the ZSU23-4M2. Now this version removed the radar and doubled the ammunition capacity as a result. Modelling this, there is a slight difference externally. The radar dish would have been removed and a small cupola was added instead for night vision. Having said that, some versions appear to have left the radar dish on the outside and just removed the internal, so you could field it as that. I don't think, being honest, at this scale anyway, anybody's going to be particularly bothered. There is a more modern variant, or a couple of more modern variants, made by some of the successor states and Poland, I believe. Now these have added boxes with anti-aircraft missiles to the top, but none of these saw service during the Cold War. If you're playing even more modern than that, that might be something perhaps for you to have a look into.